Welcome back, welcome back, welcome back, everybody, to another chapter of Hazardous Technology and the Minds Who Make It. Written by Ukulele Villain and read by yours truly, Freewata, with the source being AO3. We are here moving on to another chapter. It looks like this is the end of part one at least, but we still have a bunch more. This is a 234-page document, and we are just starting on page 26. So don't think this is anywhere close to the end of the story just yet. Last time we kind of went through a little bit more of like the growing age of Powder and how Victor played into that. Her kind of like spiteful attitude towards people of Piltover, but the people of Piltover also spiting Powder. And we're seeing this sort of like mix of, well, she's already the enemy, and she's kind of, now she wants to kind of act like the enemy. And we saw at the end, that she was starting to build explosives again. She was starting to do what she wanted to. She was thinking of it like I think we were kind of getting it in a way as like Victor was the spearhead of her being like, yo, they need to do more for you. You're great for them and they treat you like dirt. But in the reality, he's kind of thinking like, I don't truly know who Powder is at all. It's this girl I've, helped raise and helped teach and blah blah blah. But in the end, who was she to begin with? And that's actually kind of like, I don't know, I kind of think that's a cool way of thinking about things, where all that goes on. But enough of my musings. It's time to get back into it with part one, before and now, with the chapter notes at the end saying, that's a wrap on part one. I can't believe this story went from a one shot to a fully formed story, idea, and outline. Updates have been coming at a quick pace, but will slow down on account of me fleshing out the work and cleaning up for part two. Thank you to everyone who has shown excitement and attention so far. And I think that goes back to you, Ukulele Villain. Thank you as well for writing this. Back into it. Before. Powder, we need to go. Vi had taken Powder across the river again. The first time was to follow their parents, who did not return. The second, to rob a naive Piltover man. But then, Powder had not returned. Terrible irony. Also, I'm starting to think that this may not be Vi. This may be V, like Victor. But we'll see. She'd been buried, dead to the world. Not to the arcane gems, though. They had caused the disaster, but also saved her. Those blue lights, shimmering and floating in the brief second between her existence and oblivion. The flip of the cosmic coin that came with their power had landed on sparing her. Lucky her. Powder was brought back to the world, in a limbo of sorts. Topside was the land of light, but it was guarded by terrifying creatures and seemed unreal, hostile in its fiction. It was strange seeing enforcers without their breathing masks on. She had made the mistake of eating the Piltover food and falling asleep there. So tired and exhausted and stupid. If this had been a story Vi was reading to her, Powder would have squirmed and jumped them up and down on their bunk bed trying to yell at the girl in the book. Echo used to roll his eyes at those characters, assumptions in his grin that they'd have been done better. Echo, with his goofy smile and that hid wise eyes from enforcers as he tightened screws with a spanner. The damning final prognosis from Echo to Powder would be delivered with a wave of a screwdriver like a young kid. If she'd just turned around, she would have been fine. Powder had tried to run back home, but nothing could have ever been that easy. The way home was closed to her, the pathways made by Vander, and her entire family shut right before her. She could pull her fingertips back without them being smashed. Death was a firm and closed door. Back to the underworld for Powder, it seemed. Ironic that it was called Topside. The bright and shimmery land of death built right on top of her warm, dark world of life. At least Victor was trapped too. He had made the most of it. Vi would have taken one look at him and said, poor bastard. Okay, that's the separation. There are two. Sorry, that's just for me being an idiot. Powder truly began to trust him a week into her resurrection. Her new life, it would seem, because his room was like a sibling to Echo's. It had matching oil stains on the desk and a tin can proudly on a windowsill. The treasures clashed heavily with everything else in the academy. Echo had been so excited by plants. Powder, I found some apple seeds. Once it gets big enough to move from under the lamp, we can find a place with actual light. It was a small room, with an even smaller bed that was dwarfed by a bookshelf that must have been dragged from somewhere else, too. Victor had a fancy cane and nice pilty clothes. That might have been it. The rest was distinctly like her home, part of her world, her old, messy world. Jace told me you could keep this. Victor had held out the horse Powder had taken when they were robbing Victor's friend. Honestly, I think he had completely forgotten he had had it. Powder wondered how much it could have been smelted down for back home. Any number more than 100 combined with currency terms seemed astronomical to her. Victor let her stay there in his dorm, hidden, quiet, her metal horse and his books. She'd sink into the pillows and blankets, reading for the day. She never knew someone could have this many books. Time moved slowly and quickly, and not at all. Victor, who had seemed invisible when she first met him, was now being noticed. Pilties had been knocking on his door a lot, having him sign things and come talk to Mr. Tallis. He seemed frazzled at this, apologizing to her every time he had come back looking flabbergasted and pacing around the room, his cane clunking back and forth. On the 9th day, when she had found a way to speak again, Victor returned from another meeting with news. I have found a new place to live. What's wrong with your room? It had been days since she had spoken, and her voice felt odd with disuse. Victor, who had been neither old like Vander, nor young like Milo, but instead that strange gray zone of adult, suddenly looked like he was Vi's age. He seemed to falter for a moment before righting himself and responding. It could be good to have a bigger desk to tinker on. Powder stood at the threshold of the door, certain for an instantaneous second that if she stepped out, she'd fizzle from existence like the lights of the arcane gyms. A voice would shout, Hey, isn't that the girl from the Undercity who was supposed to die in that explosion? Yeah, that's me. And she would melt, transform into a radioactive blue puddle on the floor of the academy. Either that, or the enforcers would grab her for daring to step foot on their streets, not hiding from rooftop to rooftop. Victor kept looking at her through the walk, and she kept either looking at him or his shoes. She had run away from him once, so she couldn't lay too much fault at his feet. Powder could have told him that she'd only done that because a little over a week ago, there had been people to run towards. That thought had no way to be said, though. It was sitting on her chest, and in her throat and in the sides of her head like a pinch. Powder bumped into Victor when he stopped at a smaller building. They were still in what she had recently learned was called the Academy District. Despite knowing little of anything about the person who had become her only living friend, she could tell he was excited. His hands fidgeted with the keys and too eagerly pushed open the door, almost letting his cane slip and clatter on the ground. When they entered and realized there was no furniture, Powder laughed. It escaped her, uncontrolled and rough against the deep lassitude she hadn't had the energy to fight. Victor made a sound that was a mix of an eh, and oh. Most of my possessions are actually the Academy's. That's okay. She had the clothes she was wearing, Mouser, and the metal horse. All of her crayons and paints were back in the bar. That's how I really know you're not from here. It wasn't the accent. A woman arrived later. She was around Victor's age, with similar clothes and with dark skin and lots of hair in a bun. She had a box that she had held out to Victor, who took it in the crook of his arm. Awkward conversation ensued as Powder stayed hidden behind a corner near what would be her room. She had rebelled against the idea that she was about to have a space she wasn't sharing. She nearby? I'd love to meet her, help with the culture shock. Powder ducked behind the corner, knowing she'd have to rejoin the living world soon. She'd have to leave her siblings and Vander behind. It was a mortifying thought that crawled up beside the dozens of other unarticulated ideas. When the Pilty kids ask what your surname is, what will you tell them? I'm Powder of the Last Drop, Powder of the Fissures, Powder from across the river? Powder, Victor said from the main room. The shifting of the box and Kane followed footsteps where he found her semi-hiding. My friend Sky brought some of my things. Blankets too. You would have never guessed that I have been financed by the government. We'll get to real beds soon. Victor? It was the first time she had used his name. Am I going to the jail island? It had a name. It had to have a name. She was too tired to think, and for an instant she could hear Milo making fun of her for not knowing what the prison island was called. Impossible lethargy descended on her. Victor eased himself to the floor for the second time in their friendship. Powder could hear mechanical clicks as he did so. He pulled from the box a few journals and placed them next to her. No, you are not going anywhere unless you want to. Look. He opened to a page with sketches of the stones she had grabbed from the apartment. Your curiosity led to an incredible good. He wasn't lying to her. She could tell. The people in her life, and even Vi, had practiced saying things they thought would make her feel better. But this was true. These runes, they made the magic. The stones you were drawn to were magic. Powder, without you, the good that will come of this will not exist. He was a scientist, but the fervor in which he believed in himself, in her, in Jace, and Hextech, in the Undercity, it was almost religious. If he hadn't been so smart, she'd have considered him naive. Victor would go on later to describe Hextech like a dream. He never excluded her from that dream. Now, previously was before, but this is now in like a little subtext. Powder had one emotion running through her mind. That emotion was, to put it succinctly, being tired of everyone's bullshit. It was the most universal emotion inherited from her mother's side. Probably. Had she ever tried to make the best impression? No. But had she worked to maintain the connections of those surrounding herself and Victor? Also no. But Pilties had no right to be judging who burned and destroyed bridges. She'd cleaned her glasses. Through the entire meeting, rubbing the lens between cloth, index finger, and thumb, over and over and over and over and... Oh gods, they made me sit in Victor's chair. She was placed next to Jace while he detailed to the council everything that was stolen. A stabilized hex reactor, a series of our notes and research, my friend too. We believe Victor was taken on account that he is intimately familiar with hex tech. She had agreed to come only because she had no idea what to do. Heimerdinger was giving her that look too, all bushy-faced and sad eyes, little pitying offerings for an already sad girl, it would seem. Powder flung her chair away when they had responded to the situation with a vote to give Jace a seat on the council. It was an action that had immense weight, but in reality was clueless, useless to her. The council was built for the topside world. The back hit the marble floor, chair legs upended like a scrambling horse. She now had less time to prepare. Knowing the Pilties, they'd find a way to make getting to the Undercity difficult. Whatever Kim Baron had kidnapped Victor just needed to be paid a handsome sum of coin, or Powder could alleviate the guy of a few teeth. The second option had more meat to it, tangible and satisfying, and included Powder getting to tell people she had told them so. It's a Kim Baron. It's not her. You didn't see her. She's dead, and dead people don't kidnap living people. On Progress Day, Victor had come home with a crutch instead of a cane. On Progress Day, Powder had gone to the sky docks to see the ships, and a flash of pink hair had spooked her. Ghosts were everywhere. Powder! Jace was chasing after her. The council's headquarters had the type of hallways where every step echoed, bounced, and told the poor bureaucrats on the 4th floor you were having an argument. The academy had a similar layout, always letting Powder know when Victor was close. Powder! Wait! Very original, Jace. Next you'll say something like, I'm so sorry. I get it. Congrats on being officially the god of Piltover. Let me know when it's time for us to do our daily prostrating before your shrines. Damn it, Powder, he hissed, and in 2 large strides he caught up to her with the audacity to grab her wrist and keep her from leaving. She could have elbowed him in the gut, throat, or face. Only old habits and many looks Victor had given her stopped any current violence. Why won't you let people help you? He was such a moron, believing that help came freely because everyone around him would have given anything to be in his broad and beautiful shadow. Please, he's trying. Victor had an admiration for Jace that gave his partner leeway in almost all things. It drove her frustration in speedy circles around her eyes, making her almost dizzy. You say everyone is trying. Powder was close to escaping his grasp, but instead she sagged. It was acute how powerful Talus had become. It wasn't just posters now. The man had been elected as a council member less than 30 minutes ago, and the shape of whatever reign he took would be decided swiftly. If Jace learned she was going to leave Piltover to find Victor, he'd stop her. And if he didn't, Heimerdinger would. Or Caitlin and Marcus's lovely little enforcers. Powder wanted a time machine so she could go back and kick herself for wasting rebellion on every Pilty request like it was infinite. I told Victor he was a coward. It hadn't been cowardice that made Victor the way he was in Piltover. It had been strategic and wise. But Powder, in contrast, had fucked herself years ago. Unintentionally, she had let everyone see her frustration and wrath before she had realized there was a game of attrition being played. Powder had cajoled Victor once into telling her about the first night of Hextech. The memory now was a sharp stab. I don't think Heimerdinger ever thought I'd steal his keys. I just knew something I wanted to fight for, and there was no time to ask permission to change the world. If she was to save him, to defy fate and place the ghosts to rest, she'd have to play a few Piltover games first. Powder kept up the sagging. Victor and I had a fight before he was taken. I'm sorry, Jace let go of her. I'm going to get him back. And he's strong, Powder. He'll be okay. Shit, that worked. Powder couldn't say she had ever been anything but a pestering weasel around Jace. She couldn't tell if the ease in which he believed she would open up to him was indicative of empathy or indicative of Jace Talus's constant and undying belief in his own likableness. Yeah, I thought he was off. He disappears a lot. This was not a lie. Powder had waited for him, then searched on her own. I kept checking the water wheel lab. Jace gave her a participation trophy equivalent to a chuckle and started to rabble about a funny anecdote. Finally, when she thought she'd pass out from the fake normalcy Talus was pressing into her skull, he said, My first order as councilman is going to be setting a blockade on the bridge. I know you don't trust me, Powder, but together we're going to get him back. Powder couldn't fake a smile. She pulled her glasses forward and began to rub them again against the cloth she had bought. If a Kim Baron had kidnapped Victor, they wouldn't kill him. They'd hurt him, though, and a blockade would agitate their tedious anger. He's clever, and he'll be damn grateful that you didn't entirely stop making grenades. Hearing Talus tell her about the blockade with such foolish happiness made the hidden wounds that littered her since she was 11 reopen. When will that happen? As soon as I talk to Marcus, I promise. He's having a ceremony first for the fallen enforcers. I'm also thinking of asking Caitlin on my staff. She'll know what to do. The new sheriff of Piltover had avoided Powder. A strange aura of sorts, like shame but self-pitying, clouded him every time they had vaguely encountered one another at rifle competitions. It was uncanny and eerie, and made Powder think the guy had probably loved an Undercity woman and lost her to chemical poisoning. Blah, blah, blah. That undefinable look never amounted to much of anything, but he had extended an invitation to her multiple times to join the enforcers. She had laughed in his face, the only power she had felt since she felt she had in Piltover, and reveled in the way he had flinched, barely perceptible. But around the eyes she could see a fountain of unspoken sadness. Caitlin was another story. If Jace was mildly uncomfortable and confused by Powder, then Caitlin was baffled and very near detested her. It was a professional detestment, like a low simmering begrudge that came from a smart person who's too smart to not realize you're their equal. Jace would go on to save Victor, no matter how much Powder rolled her eyes at the man she knew he held in affection for the person who had saved Hextech from never existing. But Jace was not the one who was going into the belly of the monster. Jace had been shackled to a council job. It would be Caitlin Kiraman and Sheriff Marcus at the helm, who'd only held attachments to Piltover's safety. If Victor did not survive this debacle, it was unfortunate, but never as tragic as Piltover being inconvenienced. Powder had approximately 8 hours to get across the river. Jace Tallis was not known for going back on his word. Her grenades had no nails, no shrapnel, nothing to maim with, only to escape and disarm with smoke. The small ferry she was on swayed in the waters between Piltover and the Undercity. She had time to ruminate, be haunted by her mistakes. Getting a boat to go across had been easy, scarily so. Powder's ready to hear the shouts. "Hey, isn't that the girl who was pretending to be a Pilty? That's the dead girl. She wasn't pretending, she was just living. Gods, could she not convince herself of that? Would there never be an allowance of her own existence?" "You promised me." Powder loved him. It was something she had accepted a while ago, but Victor's hypocrisy stung. She should have reminded him of the time he had tried boiling water by giving a little crank to their stove. Instead, she had called him every degrading thing she could think of. She wondered how much he hated lying in wait for dignity, for the opportunity he could build a little more belief in himself. Powder roughly shoved them from her mind to return to strategy. She had no firearms of her own either. She looked less pilty, at least, with her hair. The overalls and work clothes she'd kept forgetting messy. Powder pulled off her glasses and started to clean them. Her sister had been lucky to only need her fists and kicks to succeed. Echo and Powder had copied her moves over and over again in the alleyways after her presentation. Something deep in Powder's heart knew she'd never be able to build up muscle like that. "I've got these," Vi would flex, "and you've got those." She would point at Mouser or Rat Race or Monkey Bomb. Vi, almost like Jace, never realized that all of the creations in the world were emulating the powers they already possessed. As a side note, Vi was definitely one of my favorite people also to play. These are all some of my favorite champions I would play when I used to play League. Aside over. Powder disembarked and waited until the ferrymen left, counting back from 10 and forcing her hands to put her glasses back on her nose. Undercity was not entirely a metaphorical title. There were levels to it. No place was deeper than the lanes. To go naively forward with hands that held no guns, it was a terrifying thought. Echo's ghost came back. If she'd just turned back, she would have been fine. It smelled like the fissures. A rotten egg here with a dash of sharp and heavy, sweet, rotting concoction there. Only in the last 5 years had it been given a name. Shimmer. For the pretty purple color and the way the substance that was not only in the flowers, but also in the deep mines glowed. A ticklish and uncomfortable sensation crawled across her knuckles. Instantaneously, Powder raised her hand to smack at the thing moving across her hand. It was a firelight. The small green bug was coming out in preparation for the sunset. She held her hand aloft. A smack would make the bug a pulp smear against her wrist. The creature's life was entirely and literally in her hands. It flew towards the lanes, leaving her hand as fleetingly as it had arrived. She made a wish and followed it down into the depths. Powder had come home. And that, my friends, was the end of part 1, Before and Now. The next that we're going to get to looks like to be a little intermission. I think it still is a decent side, but I like that this is kind of jumping back and forth. I when I first got back into reading, I got very confused by perspective changes, and I think I've gotten back in I'm back into it enough where that doesn't confuse me as much. I still get a little confused sometimes, but we gotta go save Victor. How else am I gonna get my pentakill if Victor is, not able to be selected? I gotta be able to choose him. Uh, I can definitely see that Jace. I don't know if this was actually a thing or part of the fan fiction, like if this was actually part of Arcane or not. But Jace getting a council job, I could definitely see that. He was always had the moxie with him, the like slight arrogance or like kind of confidence that went into getting that public face going that people really like, and he had the brains behind it still too. He had a little bit of everything. So seeing him being in that spot is it makes sense. I love seeing that Vi and Echo were in there. I remember definitely playing Echo a lot and being terrible at him, but I love the kind of like way he worked around things with time. And Vi punched things. You punch things to make it go away. That's the way she learned. Caitlyn, I can definitely see that. I remember Caitlyn was always trying to catch like, uh, always trying to catch Jinx. I feel like or something. And I could see them having a strong detestment for each other, especially after what we've learned previously in this. Enough of the musings, though. I appreciate you all for listening in. Make sure to stay beautiful, stay hydrated, and we'll see you in the next chapter. Bye.